Have you ever felt uneasy around someone who seemed perfect? They smiled at the right moments, said all the right things. Everyone seemed to love them, and yet, something inside you pulled back, like a quiet alarm sounding from your gut. This video is for that moment, for the part of you that knows something is off, even when everything looks right. Because what Carl Jung discovered, and what modern psychology confirms, is that the most dangerous people are not those who act evil, but those who look flawless while being deeply disconnected from their own darkness. And in the next few minutes, you'll discover why your instincts were right, why that discomfort isn't paranoia, it's perception, and why the path to safety starts not with judgment, but with seeing clearly. In Part 3, we'll uncover one of the most misunderstood psychological traps: projection. It's not just something they do, it's something we all do, until we become aware. But first, let me tell you a quick story. A client once told me about her ex. Charming, kind, deeply spiritual. Everyone adored him, but behind closed doors she always felt like something was missing, off. No yelling, no insults, just a constant sense of being slightly wrong, misread, misjudged. Until one day she realized he wasn't in a relationship with her. He was in a relationship with who he imagined her to be. And that moment changed everything. If you've ever felt like that, like you were living inside someone else's script, not your own, this video might feel like a mirror. So, if it resonates, comment below, "I felt that," hit like. Share it with someone who needs to understand what they couldn't put into words. And most of all, stay. Because what's coming might explain more than you realize. Have you ever sat across from someone and felt a strange tension rise in your chest, even though they smiled warmly, spoke kindly, and never said anything wrong? It's confusing, isn't it? They seem perfect, flawless even. Yet something in your body recoils. A whisper beneath your skin says, "Be careful." You don't see any red flags, no harsh tone, no visible manipulation, and still, your gut tightens, your breath shortens. You want to trust them. But something deeper inside says, don't. Carl Jung believed these moments are not irrational. He said our unconscious often perceives truths before our conscious mind can explain them. And when someone's energy feels wrong despite their behavior looking right, it's usually because a deeper truth is leaking through the cracks of their perfection. These people, they're not loud or aggressive. They don't insult or control overtly. No, their danger is more subtle, more refined. They are masters of the social mask. Jung called it the persona. It's the face we show the world, crafted carefully to meet others' expectations. And we all have one. It helps us function. But sometimes, a person becomes so identified with their mask, they forget there's anything underneath. They believe their own performance. They convince themselves they are always kind, always moral, always wise. They leave no room for anger, fear, jealousy, or darkness. And when those parts inevitably stir beneath the surface, they don't recognize them as their own. So, they cast them out, onto you. This is when it gets dangerous. Because when a person denies their own shadow, they project it onto others. Suddenly, you are the one who is selfish. You are the one who is angry. You are the problem, not them. You feel misunderstood, drained, confused. You start questioning your own reactions, your own memory. And that's exactly how this mask harms, not by malice, but by disconnection from truth. And perhaps the most terrifying part? These people often have no idea they're doing it. They genuinely believe they're helping. They don't see the manipulation because to them, there isn't any. That's why your instincts matter. When your nervous system senses a misalignment, listen. The danger isn't always in the obvious. Sometimes, it's in the perfection. So, next time you meet someone who seems too polished, too composed, too kind to be real, ask yourself, do I feel safe Or do I feel small? Your body might know the answer before your mind can. If this part resonated with you, if you've ever had that quiet alarm go off inside you, comment below with, "I've felt that." Let's see how many of us share this strange, silent knowing. We all wear a mask. Not a physical one, of course, but a psychological mask. A persona crafted from years of trying to be acceptable, likable, successful. We shape it in childhood, polish it through school, reinforce it at work, until one day, it wears us more than we wear it. Carl Jung called this mask the persona, and he didn't mean it as an insult. The persona is necessary. It helps us adapt, survive, connect. It's what allows us to play different roles: employee, friend, parent, leader. But here's the problem. When we become the persona, we forget who we are underneath. You've likely met someone like this. They're incredibly polite, always calm. They never raise their voice, never argue, never seem upset. And yet, after spending time with them, you leave feeling hollow, like something essential was missing. That's the giveaway. See, when someone is overly identified with their persona, they become a performance. Every word is measured, every gesture calculated. They smile on cue, nod at the right moments, agree with whatever keeps the peace. But you never really see them. They might be kind, but their kindness doesn't warm you. They might be generous, but it feels rehearsed. And no matter how long you talk, you never feel known. That's because the person behind the mask has gone silent. This often starts innocently. Maybe they grew up in a home where expressing real emotion led to punishment or rejection. Maybe they were praised only when they performed well. So, they learned. It's safer to be perfect than to be real. But over time, the mask becomes a prison. They forget how to be spontaneous, vulnerable, honest. And the more polished the mask, the more intense the pressure inside. Because here's the truth Jung saw so clearly. Everything we hide doesn't go away. It hides, yes, but it grows. In the unconscious. And one day it erupts. Sometimes in anger, sometimes in depression, sometimes in sudden, inexplicable anxiety. The perfect mask cracks, and the real self demands to be seen. But until that day comes, their presence remains eerie. Not because they're bad, but because they're missing. And when we spend too much time around these perfectly masked people, we start to feel unsure of ourselves. Like we're the ones being too emotional, too messy, too much. We start to perform too. We mirror them, and little by little, we lose ourselves too. So how do you spot this mask? Ask, does this person ever admit fault? Do they ever share real emotion, not just appropriate emotion? Do they ever get things wrong? Or are they always calm, always right, always controlled? Because real people are messy. They contradict themselves. They laugh too loud. They cry at the wrong time. They say things they regret. And that's what makes them real. If you've ever felt like you were the only messy one in the room, like everyone else had it together and you were just trying to breathe, comment below with, "Still human." You're not alone, and you're not broken. You're just real. Have you ever been accused of something that felt completely off? Someone looks you in the eye and says you're manipulative, or selfish, or cruel. And your first thought is, that's not me. But your second thought is doubt. Is it? You replay every conversation, every action, trying to find what they saw, trying to explain, to defend. But nothing feels clear. And no matter what you say, they don't hear it. That's not just conflict. That's projection. Carl Jung warned us. The human mind doesn't easily accept its darker parts. The fear, the envy, the anger, the shame. Instead of facing them, we push them into the shadow. But what's buried doesn't disappear. It waits. It grows. And eventually, it demands release. When someone projects, they don't lie. They don't even realize they're distorting things. In fact, their conviction is what makes it so convincing. They genuinely believe you're the villain, not because of something you did, but because they cast you in a role their unconscious needed filled. You've become the mirror, but a twisted one. You reflect not who they are, but what they refuse to see in themselves. This is why projection feels so eerie. It doesn't argue with reality, it replaces it. You try to speak clearly, but they already have a script. You try to show your truth, but they're not looking for it. They're looking for confirmation of a story they didn't even know they were writing. And the closer you are to them, emotionally, socially, professionally, the more trapped you feel. Because it's not just a misunderstanding, it's a psychological trap. You feel blamed for feelings that aren't yours, held accountable for wounds you didn't cause, seen not for who you are, but for who they fear becoming. And if you're empathic, you start to absorb it. You question yourself, apologize more, shrink. Or maybe eventually you explode, finally reacting to the weight of false accusation. And when that happens, they nod and say, "See, I knew you were like this." That's the cruel loop of projection. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But most people stop at irritation and start pointing fingers. So how do you protect yourself? Notice the patterns. Do you always feel guilty around this person? Do you feel like you're walking on eggshells, even when you're being honest? Do they often attribute motives to you that you never expressed? Then pause, not to argue, but to anchor. Remember your truth. Remember who you are outside of their story. And more importantly, don't play the role they've assigned you. Don't shrink, don't perform, just be real. Because the only way to break projection is reflection. If this landed in your chest, if you've ever felt like someone else's shadow was being cast over your life, comment below with, "Not my role." Because you deserve to be seen for who you really are. There's a special kind of danger that doesn't shout or threaten. It preaches. It speaks of truth with total conviction, of goodness with no nuance, of moral clarity as something they possess and others lack. And at first, it sounds inspiring. They seem enlightened, confident, certain. But Carl Jung saw something far more troubling beneath that certainty. He called it ego inflation, when someone no longer speaks as themselves, but for something bigger, an archetype, a divine truth, a moral absolute. They don't say, "This is my view." They say, "This is how it is." And if you disagree, you're not just wrong. You're lost, dangerous, evil. This is not arrogance in the usual sense. It's deeper, more seductive, because it doesn't wear the mask of pride. It wears the costume of virtue. It says, "I'm not better than you. I'm just awake. You're still asleep." And in that belief lies immense danger, because inflated egos don't doubt. They don't reflect. They don't ask, "Could I be wrong?" They ask, "Why are you so blind?" This is how moral inflation works. It creates a binary world, right, wrong, light, dark, awake, asleep. And in doing so, it strips people of their complexity and humanity. You are no longer a person with fears and wounds and contradictions. You're either part of the truth or you're not. And if you're not, you become disposable, or worse, a threat. Jung observed that those with inflated egos often become leaders. Their certainty is magnetic. Their clarity is calming, especially in chaotic times. People want to follow someone who seems so sure, but the clarity is a lie. Because behind that mask of enlightenment is someone deeply afraid of being ordinary, of being wrong, of being human. They can't tolerate doubt, so they ascend. Spiritually, morally, intellectually. They merge with the image of the Savior, the prophet, the judge, and speak with a voice that feels sacred. But that voice isn't sacred. It's just unexamined. And when their world collapses, when people see through the illusion, it's not just a fall. It's a crash, a breakdown, a spiritual identity crisis so deep it feels like death, because no one can play God forever. So what do you do when you meet someone like this? You resist the pull of their certainty. You remember, real wisdom isn't loud. It's not absolute. It's humble, curious, willing to sit in the unknown, and most importantly, you look within. Because inflated egos only gain power when others are looking for someone to follow. So ask, where do I seek saviors? Where do I trade my own intuition for someone else's authority? Because the more we idolize certainty, the more we lose ourselves. If this stirred something in you, if you've ever been hurt by someone who meant well, but refused to see their own shadow, comment with, clarity isn't truth. Because real clarity comes from reflection, not domination. Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt like they weren't fully there? Their body is present, their voice unchanged, but something behind their gaze has shifted. It's no longer personal. It's mythic, charged, consuming. Carl Jung called this archetypal possession, a psychological state where a person becomes overtaken by a universal pattern and forgets who they truly are. In Jungian psychology, archetypes are not just symbols. They are deep forces that live in the collective unconscious. The hero, the victim, the savior, the judge, the martyr. We all carry these patterns. At times we draw on them in healthy ways. A mother taps the nurturing archetype. A teacher draws from the wise mentor. But when the ego fuses with an archetype, something dangerous happens. The person doesn't use the archetype. They become it. They stop responding as themselves. Every action, every word is filtered through the lens of that role. It becomes total, consuming, unquestioned. You're no longer talking to John or Sarah. You're speaking to the righteous one, the wounded one, the warrior of truth. And these roles don't negotiate. They don't adapt. They declare. That's why it feels so jarring. The human disappears. All that remains is the script. You might notice the tone shifts. Their energy gets heavier, their logic rigid. They can't reflect, because their identity is now fused with the role. This happens in big ways, with spiritual leaders, political radicals, social influencers. But it also happens in everyday relationships. The friend who always plays the victim. The partner who insists on being the savior. The colleague who sees every disagreement as persecution. These people aren't acting. They're possessed. Not by a ghost, but by an idea so powerful, it eclipses their individuality. And it's not always evil. In fact, it often feels righteous. That's what makes it so dangerous. Because when you challenge them, you're not challenging them. You're challenging the archetype. And archetypes don't like being questioned. They double down. Get louder, blame harder, and they believe deeply they're doing what's right. But Jung warns, the bigger the inflation, the harder the fall. Because no human can sustain the weight of a myth. Eventually, the cracks form. The breakdown comes. Depression, anxiety, burnout, or even a psychotic break. So what can you do when someone you love becomes overtaken? You don't feed the role. You stop playing the opposite part in their drama. If they're the victim, don't become the rescuer or persecutor. If they're the savior, don't become the one in need or the sinner. Instead, step out of the script. Return to human, reflect. Ask questions that bring them back to themselves. And then, do the hardest part. Look within. Because we're all vulnerable to this. We all want to matter, to be heroic, to be seen. But the moment we believe we are the role, we stop being real. If this felt familiar, if you've ever lost yourself in a role or watched someone you love get consumed, comment below with, "Come back to yourself." Because being human is enough. You don't need to be anything else. Some people seem to live inside a loop. No matter how many new beginnings they try, somehow they always end up in the same emotional place, hurt again, betrayed again, misunderstood again. The jobs change, the partners change, the cities change, but the emotional pattern stays eerily the same. Carl Jung called this phenomenon repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate old wounds, not out of desire, but out of psychological necessity. It sounds counterintuitive. Why would anyone seek out pain? Because the unconscious doesn't crave happiness, it craves resolution. If a wound remains unhealed, the psyche will attempt to revisit it, again and again, not to suffer, but to finally win. Think of the child who was never truly seen. As an adult, they may feel magnetically drawn to partners who are emotionally unavailable. Not because they like the distance, but because part of them believes, if I can make this person love me, it will prove I was always worthy. It's a tragic logic, because the wound isn't healed, it's repeated. The same silence, the same abandonment, the same ache. And over time, we stop seeing it as a pattern and start seeing it as identity. I always attract narcissists. I guess I'm just unlucky in love. People always take advantage of me. But Jung warned, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate. This isn't about blaming yourself. It's about recognizing how your inner story keeps replaying itself, like a scratched record, waiting for closure. And what's even harder, these patterns often feel familiar, comfortable, because the brain doesn't measure good or bad, it measures known. Even suffering, when repeated enough, becomes home. That's why people stay in toxic dynamics. That's why we feel drawn to the same type. That's why we self-sabotage at the edge of success. Because the unconscious is pulling the strings, whispering, maybe this time it'll end differently. But without awareness, it won't. So how do you break the loop? First, you name it. Ask, what emotional ending keeps showing up in my life? Do I always end up feeling abandoned, attacked, ignored? That's your pattern. Second, you pause the script. When someone starts to trigger the old dynamic, don't react from the wound. Don't play your usual role. Just notice, reflect, interrupt the ritual. And third, this is crucial, you hold yourself with compassion. Because these loops don't mean you're broken. They mean your soul is still trying to heal. If this spoke to your experience, if you've felt stuck in the same painful story over and over, comment below with, I see the pattern. Awareness is the first brave step toward freedom. There's a silent war raging inside many people, a war they don't even know they're refighting. On the outside, they seem composed, responsible, maybe even admirable. But underneath that calm exterior is a swirl of emotions they've never dared to face. Carl Jung saw this all the time. He said that most people don't really know themselves. They know a version of themselves, a socially acceptable, culturally approved, emotionally edited version. The one who is good, normal, balanced. But the deeper self, the wild self, the one that carries rage, jealousy, fear, longing, grief, that part is buried. And anything buried too long turns volatile. That's when things get dangerous. Not just for them, but for everyone around them. Because when someone refuses to look inward, they start reacting outward. They start blaming others for feelings they don't understand. They start punishing others for shadows they've never named. You might feel it in the way they speak to you. Cold, dismissive, passive-aggressive. You might feel it in how they twist your words or accuse you of things you never did. You might feel it in the strange sense that they're not fully present, like they're talking to someone else, not really to you. That's the giveaway. You're no longer in a relationship with a person. You're interacting with a defense mechanism, a projection, a persona, a ghost of who they used to be before they shut down. And what's so hard is they don't know they're doing it. They genuinely believe they're acting with reason. They don't see their disconnection. To them, you're the problem. This is what Jung meant when he said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. It's not evil. It's fear. Fear of breaking the image. Fear of admitting weakness. Fear of looking in the mirror and seeing not who they wish they were, but who they really are. But there's hope, because the moment someone becomes aware of this inner war, a new path opens. A path not of perfection, but of integration. It starts with asking, what part of me do I judge most in others? What triggers me irrationally? What do I keep denying, excusing, or avoiding in myself? And then, listening. Not to shame, not to fix, but to understand. Because the parts of you you've exiled, they're not trying to destroy you. They're trying to come home. And the people who hurt you, who project, manipulate, or withdraw, most of them are just lost in their own unexamined pain. That doesn't mean you excuse the harm, but it does mean you start seeing it clearly, not as a reflection of your worth, but as evidence of their inner war. If you've ever felt like someone turned you into their battlefield, comment below with, "I choose peace." You don't have to join their war. You don't have to fight what isn't yours. There's a moment in every healing journey when you realize the problem isn't just out there, it's also in here. It's the moment you stop pointing fingers and start holding a mirror. Carl Jung believed this was the turning point of true transformation. Not when you eliminate your darkness, but when you finally acknowledge it. He called it shadow integration, the lifelong process of making peace with the parts of yourself you've rejected. Your anger, your envy, your insecurity, your desire, your fear. Most people think these parts are flaws. Jung saw them as unfinished business, not enemies to destroy, but aspects of the self that need to be seen, understood, and reintegrated. Because what you don't own, owns you. If you don't admit you can be controlling, your relationships suffer. If you don't admit you can be afraid, your confidence becomes a mask. If you don't admit you can be cruel, your kindness becomes compulsive. The shadow isn't evil, it's unconscious. And the more you deny it, the more power it has. That's why so many people project. Why they become possessed. Why they repeat their pain. Because they haven't made room for their whole self. Only the curated self. But integration changes that. It doesn't mean you act on every impulse. It means you recognize them. It doesn't mean you like every part of you. It means you stop pretending those parts don't exist. And in that honesty, something powerful happens. You become less reactive, less judgmental, less likely to see others as enemies or threats. Because you've already met your own monster and realized it wasn't trying to destroy you. It was trying to protect you in the only way it knew how. Integration doesn't look glamorous. It looks like pausing before lashing out and asking, what's really hurting here? Feeling jealousy rise and sitting with it instead of masking it with pride. Admitting you made a mistake without collapsing into shame. And slowly you change. You become real, not polished, not perfect, but whole. The people around you feel it. They trust you more. Not because you're flawless, but because you're honest. You're safe. You don't need to control. You don't need to blame. You don't need to impress. You just need to show up, as all of you. If this resonated deeply, if you're ready to face the mirror not with fear, but with love, comment below with, "This too is me." Because wholeness doesn't mean fixing yourself. It means accepting yourself fully. In a world full of filters, roles, and expectations, being real is a revolutionary act. It's not flashy, it's not loud. But when you meet someone who is truly integrated, who has done the work of owning their shadow, you feel it instantly. They don't need to prove anything. They don't perform. They don't posture. They speak with calm clarity. They admit when they're wrong. They don't rush to fix your pain, but they sit with you in it, without flinching, because they've sat with their own. These are the people Jung described as whole, not perfect, not always peaceful, but aware, grounded, present. They've met their anger, and don't let it control them. They've faced their fear, and don't let it define them. They've touched their shame, and don't let it silence them. And because of that, you trust them deeply. You feel safe not because they're flawless, but because they're real. They can handle your truth, your mess, your complexity, because they've made space for their own, and in a world that constantly demands performance. This kind of presence is rare and unforgettable. But here's the thing. You can become that person. Not by chasing enlightenment, not by striving for goodness, but by choosing honesty, again and again, by noticing your defenses, and softening, by owning your patterns and staying curious, by listening to your body and honoring its truth. You don't have to be a guru. You don't need a perfect past. You just need the willingness to meet yourself, fully, tenderly, honestly. Because that's what integration looks like. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's slow. It's steady. And over time, it transforms everything. Your relationships become less reactive. Your inner critic softens. Your need for approval fades. And in its place, a quiet confidence emerges. Not the kind that says, "Look at me," but the kind that says, "I know who I am, and I'm okay with it." That's what makes you trustworthy. That's what makes you magnetic. That's what makes you whole. If this vision speaks to your soul, if you want to be that safe space for yourself and others, comment below with, "I am becoming." Because you don't have to be there yet. You just have to be on the way. At the end of all this, after the masks, the projections, the roles, the loops, there is only one place left to go, the mirror. Not the mirror on your wall, but the one in your soul, the mirror that doesn't show your appearance, but your essence. Carl Jung believed that true transformation doesn't begin with external change. It begins with awareness, with a willingness to look inward, honestly and without judgment. And this is where your new path begins. Not by fixing others, not by escaping your pain, not by chasing spiritual highs, but by standing in front of the mirror and whispering, "This too is me." The jealousy, the fear, the ambition, the self-doubt, the part that wants to control, the part that shuts down, the part that's still hurting. You don't need to justify it or explain it away. You just need to acknowledge it. Because the parts you resist the most often hold the keys to your deepest healing. The moment you stop running from yourself, the loop ends. The moment you embrace the messy, contradictory, beautiful chaos that is you, the war quiets. And a new story begins. One not based on fear or defense or illusion, but on integration, on wholeness, on truth. You'll still stumble. You'll still forget. But now you'll have a compass, and that compass will always point to your inner truth. No more waiting for permission, no more chasing external validation. Just you, choosing to be present, choosing to be real, choosing to begin again. So wherever you are in this journey, whether you are just waking up or already walking deep into your shadow, know this: you're not alone, you're not broken, and you're not behind. You're just human. And that is enough. If this final part stayed with you, if you were ready to meet yourself with honesty and grace, comment below with, "This is my beginning." Because it is. Right here, right now. With the courage to face the mirror and walk forward.